whispers of Asia, where ancient rituals breathe beneath the soil, where shadows cling to incense smoke and the dead never truly rest. Tonight, we bring you a tale from the silent riverbanks of Ayutthaya, a story soaked in funeral chants, drenched in cursed fire, and haunted by a soul that was never fully laid to rest. This is not just a ghost story, it's a spiritual unraveling, a ritual interrupted, a life split in two. When a cremation fire refuses to burn, the living must confront what was buried and what should never have been disturbed. Some deaths do not end with the final breath. Some souls remain, watching, waiting. This is the story of Ratri. This is the cremation that never ended. The sun began to rise over the slow-moving waters of the Chao Phraya River, casting gold onto the thatched rooftops of the quiet Ayutthaya village. Mist clung to the treetops like lingering breath, and the monks' morning chants rolled gently across the dew-soaked fields. It was the 7th day of Ratri's funeral. In Thai tradition, the 7th day is sacred, the final moment the spirit of the dead lingers close before they must be sent off, burned, released. And today, Ratri was supposed to leave. Her body had been prepared with care. She lay atop the ornate wooden cremation pyre beneath the cremation pavilion, dressed in white silk, lotus blossoms tucked into her folded hands. Her face, pale and still, held a peace that her family could not understand. No one knew how she had died. She was only 23, healthy, gentle, beloved, and yet, one morning, she simply didn't wake. They had called the monks, performed the rituals, burned the incense, and whispered her name each night to guide her soul. The villagers came to pay respects, murmuring soft prayers, avoiding her mother's hollow eyes. But the air never felt right. The funeral had been too quiet. And now it was time to end it. Prasert, her 16-year-old brother, knelt by the pavilion steps, his hands clasped tightly, fingers turning white with pressure. His eyes did not leave her face. Behind him, their mother, Majintana, wept silently. Their father had not spoken since the 3rd day. The head monk, Prakru Samchai, lit the ceremonial candle. Its flame wavered. The 3 junior monks stepped forward to chant the final Pali verses. The crowd bowed their heads. The air felt heavy, not with grief, but with something unseen. When it was time, the candle was lowered to the edge of the pyre. The moment stretched, and nothing happened. The candle burned, but the fire would not take. A murmur swept through the crowd. The monk tried again, this time pressing the flame deeper into the wood. Still, nothing. Another monk fetched kerosene, pouring it across the base of the pyre. The scent of fuel overpowered the incense. The flame was lowered once more. Silence. A sizzle. A flicker. Then, nothing. The fire refused to light. A chill rippled through the pavilion. Even the monks looked at each other with unease. It wasn't wind. It wasn't damp wood. It was something else. Prasert's breath caught. He stepped closer. That's when he saw it. Ratri's fingers had moved. No one else noticed. Her hands were still folded, the lotus blossoms in place. But he saw it. Just the faintest twitch of a thumb, like the last echo of a forgotten thought. He stepped back. The sky darkened suddenly, as if a cloud had moved over the sun. birds stopped chirping. The dog at the gate began to howl, a long, broken sound that didn't stop. The head monk turned to Ma Jintana and gently said, "Perhaps the spirit is not ready." That night, the air inside the family home was suffocating. The mourners had gone, the monks had left. The pyre sat untouched, cold, unburnt, a sign of imbalance. Ma Jintana sat in front of Ratri's portrait, her eyes swollen. She lit another incense stick, hands trembling. "My child, why don't you go?" Prasert lay in his room, still in his funeral whites. The silence around him was strange, not peaceful, but expectant. Sleep came slowly, then suddenly, and in his dream she came. Ratri. She stood beneath the pavilion, her funeral dress fluttering in a wind that didn't exist. Her skin looked pale and papery. Her hair hung wet over one shoulder. She smiled, but it wasn't a smile of peace. "You buried the wrong part of me," she whispered. Then her eyes rolled back, revealing nothing but white. And behind her, something moved, a shadow, another figure, a woman, pregnant, barefoot, her face twisted in agony. She raised her hand and pointed at him. Prasert screamed himself awake. The next morning, they tried the fire again. More monks, more chants, more fuel. But the wood refused, the fire refused, and as the villagers looked on in silence, they began to murmur. Some said the spirit was vengeful. Others said the body had been cursed. A few whispered about the land, that there had been trouble before, that something was buried too close to the temple wall, something forgotten. But no one spoke it aloud. No one dared say the word Pitai Tong Klom, the ghost of a woman who died during childbirth, a spirit with no peace, no name, and no fear of flame. That night, the footsteps began, not heavy, not loud, but soft, barefoot, deliberate. They moved across the teakwood floorboards, slowly, slowly, then stopped outside Prasert's door. He didn't move, he didn't breathe. The door creaked open by itself, and a voice whispered, "Half of me is still out there." Prasert hadn't spoken since he woke screaming. The memory of Ratri's voice in the dream clung to him like damp cloth. "You buried the wrong part of me." The words echoed behind his eyes, louder in silence, sharper in stillness. He avoided the pavilion, refused to look at the pyre, but it didn't matter. Her face followed him, in his tea, in the mirror, in the smoke curling from the incense that now never stopped burning. That morning, Ma Jintana found footprints on the floor, small, bare, ash gray. They led from the front door to the altar where Ratri's photograph sat, and stopped. No one in the house had feet that size. No one admitted to walking barefoot through the living room. She cleaned them with a cloth soaked in holy water, but by nightfall, the prints returned, darker, clearer. The villagers whispered now, louder, sharper. They said the fire's refusal was a sign. They said Ratri might not be only Ratri. Some women refused to come near the pavilion. A few men said they saw someone standing beside the unlit pyre at dusk, a woman in white, eyes black, mouth open but unmoving. They swore it wasn't the girl they'd known. The village elder, Kun Yayi Prapa, muttered to the monks that the family should call a Mo Pi, a spirit doctor, before the house turned into something other. But the monks refused. No need to mix superstition with sorrow, they said. And yet, the fire still would not burn. That night, Brassert dreamt again. But this time, it didn't feel like a dream. He was standing in the cremation pavilion, alone. Fog drifted low to the floor, thick as smoke, swirling around his ankles. The wood of the pyre creaked beside him, though nothing moved. Then, a flicker of movement in the mist. Ratri stepped forward, not walking, but gliding. Her feet never touched the ground. Her hands hung limp at her sides. Her eyes were wide, but lifeless, and her mouth never moved. Yet he heard her. Inside his head, a voice that split in two, his sister's and something deeper, rawer, like a woman groaning in pain under the earth. I am not whole. You burned the body, but not the shadow. Then, behind her, the smoke parted. Another figure appeared. She was pregnant, her face swollen, jaw slack, eyes rolled upward. Her lips trembled, but made no sound. But her hands clutched her belly, and she wept, black tears. The pregnant woman stepped beside Ratri. Their forms overlapped, and Ratri's body began to split. One half turned to ash, the other remained flesh. One screamed, the other whispered, "Find her, or I will burn this house myself." Brassert awoke with ash on his pillow. The next morning he told his mother. Gintana was silent for a long time. Then she got up and walked into Ratri's bedroom. She came back holding the girl's funeral clothes, the ones she had been laid in. They were soaked at the hem, not with water, but with cremation oil. The next to speak was Kunlecht, a neighbor who had worked at the temple for years. He stood at the family gate that afternoon, hat in hand, eyes heavy. "I saw her," he said, "last night, standing in the banyan grove behind the pavilion. She was staring at the pyre. Her mouth moved, but the sound was wrong." Gintana whispered, "Ratri?" Kunlek shook his head. "Not her." He hesitated, and then said, "I think you should call the Mopi." Gintana nodded, but her hands trembled, because deep down she had already made the call. That evening, a black car arrived. From it stepped a man in his 60s, thin and quiet. His skin was the color of burned teak. Around his neck hung a charm made from bone, wrapped in red thread. His eyes did not blink often. He was Mopi Bunta. They led him inside. He looked at the altar, then at Ratri's photograph, then at the footprints, still fresh near the doorway. He nodded once, said nothing. Then he lit his own incense, one made of herbs, ashes, and the crushed bark of a sacred fig. The smoke curled strangely, then stopped mid-air. It didn't rise. It bent, turned, and pointed toward the pavilion. They walked in silence through the temple yard. The monks watched from afar but said nothing. One even turned away. Mopi Bunta stood before the unlit pyre. He knelt, placed his hands on the ground, and whispered, "Tell me who walks in the fireless smoke." The wind died, the trees stilled, and then a low groan came from the earth, not like a voice, but like breath through stone. Mopi Bunta rose. She is not alone. She is changing. Something else is in her shadow. That night, Maya Gintana dreamt of childbirth, not hers, another's. She was kneeling in a dark room. A woman screamed, a baby cried, then stopped. The room was filled with incense smoke, but no monks. No one came, no one helped, just silence and blood. The woman's eyes turned to hers. "You stepped over me," she whispered. The next day, Mopi asked one question. Where did Ratri go the day before she died? Maya Gintana thought. Prasert searched her phone. They found a photo. A smiling Ratri, holding a candle near the edge of the temple grounds, standing at the overgrown corner near the crumbling brick wall, the place villagers avoided, the place where the weeds grew too fast, the place where dogs refused to sleep. Mopi looked at the photograph and said, "That's where she stepped through." "Through what?" Prasert asked. Mopi's voice was quiet. "Through someone else's grave." Mopi Bunta didn't speak much as they walked toward the far edge of the temple grounds. Prasert followed closely, eyes scanning the banyan trees swaying above them. Maya Gintana carried Ratri's photo in a white cloth, as instructed, her grip shaking slightly with each step. The overgrown corner of the temple yard was quiet, too quiet. The grass here grew taller, darker. The air smelled of old incense and damp soil, like a place that had been forgotten, but not empty. There was a stone boundary marker half swallowed by vines, chipped and smeared with moss. Beyond it, the earth dipped slightly, and a patch of cracked soil lay bare beneath the roots of an old tamarind tree. "This is the place," Bunta said softly. He removed his sandals, stepped onto the dirt. His foot sunk slightly into the earth, as if the ground exhaled to receive him. "This is where the soul split began." Maya Gintana swallowed. "I don't understand. What do you mean, soul split?" Bunta did not look at her. His eyes stayed on the ground. "Some spirits die in pain, so deep they remain fused to the place they died." He knelt, picked up a handful of dirt, held it to his nose. When the living person walks across that ground unknowing, that spirit may cling to them. Not like a ghost, not a haunting. Closer than that. He turned to Prasert. Closer than a shadow. Maya Gintana shook her head. "But Ratri was pure, good. She wouldn't attract anything like that." Bunta nodded. "That's why it stuck." "Stuck?" He turned toward the grave again. "This is a Pitai Tongklom burial." The words fell like stones. "A woman who died in childbirth, body buried quickly, no ceremony, no cremation, no name." Prasert's breath caught. "Why?" "Fear. In the old days, when a woman died with her baby still inside her, the villagers feared the spirit would return, hungry, angry, restless. So they buried her here, alone, no chants, no fire." He looked at Ratri's photo. "When your sister stepped across this grave, the spirit latched onto her shadow, followed her home, slept beside her." He paused, and when she died, only half of her left. The wind shifted, cold, dry, unnatural. Bunta pulled a red string from his pouch, tied it around a rusted nail, and drove it into the ground. Then he turned to them, voice low. "You must understand, this is not possession, not in the way you think." Megintana asked, "Then what is it?" He stood slowly. "Ratri is not herself, not entirely. Her soul is split. The half that remains in the body can't leave, and the other half is out here, bound to the woman who clung to her." Megintana collapsed to her knees. Prasert stepped forward, voice cracking. "Can we fix it?" Bunta looked at him. "There is a ritual, but it is not approved by the monks." Back at the house, he laid out his tools, candles made from bone ash, ceremonial herbs, a small clay doll swaddled in red thread. He burned charcoal mixed with salt and whispered incantations under his breath. The dual soul ritual, he said, was used in ancient times when the dead and the living became entangled. He drew a symbol on the floor in white chalk, a circle with two flames facing opposite directions, one fire for the body, one fire for the shadow. "But you said the fire won't burn," Prasert said. "It won't, because it needs both souls present." He looked toward Ratri's photo on the wall, where her smile now seemed wrong, too still, too hollow. "You tried to burn half a soul," he said. "That is why the flame died." Megintana's voice trembled. "What happens if we do nothing?" Bunta didn't answer immediately. Then, without turning, he said, "She will rot in both worlds." Prasert felt his stomach twist. "What does that mean?" "Her body will begin to decay unnaturally. The flesh won't change, but the spirit inside will. It will twist, confuse itself, think it's still alive, but it's not." "And the other half?" Bunta finally turned to face them. "It will stay near the grave, hungry, confused, thinking it was cheated of death." He stared at the boy. "And when the two halves realize they are not whole, they will call to each other." Megintana whispered. "Call?" He said, "You will hear it, in the walls, in the smoke, in the silence between each breath." That night the house pulsed with strange cold. No breeze, no storm, but the walls seemed to breathe. The wooden planks creaked in a pattern like footsteps circling from room to room. The old clock in the hallway stopped ticking, and the dog outside began barking at the empty air, then stopped with a yelp and ran into the trees. In the kitchen, the candles lit themselves. In Prasert's room, the window opened with a slow groan. Ash drifted in, black, soft, impossibly warm. He saw her again, Ratri. Except she didn't touch the floor, and her eyes weren't hers. The next morning, Bunta prepared the temporary containment. He placed sacred herbs in each corner of the house, drew protective sigils on the doors, and hung a mirror at the foot of Ratri's portrait. "You must not speak her name after dark. You must not offer her food." Megintana's eyes welled. "She's my daughter." "She is no longer your daughter." Silence. Then he added, "She is half of something else now." That evening, Prasert returned to the tamarind tree alone. He stood before the cracked soil and lit a match, just one. It flickered, danced, then vanished, swallowed by an unseen breath. He stared at the ground, heart pounding, and from beneath the earth he swore he heard a sound, a faint sob, a baby's cry, and the soft, echoing whisper of his sister's voice. Please, bring me back. The morning sky bled gray as Prosert and Mopi Bunta stood once more at the edge of the temple grounds. The old tamarind tree loomed like a gatekeeper, its roots twisted outward, clutching the earth like long, dry fingers. The grave beneath it was silent, but not still. Bunta placed a bowl of coconut water mixed with charcoal at the foot of the tree. He sprinkled powdered herbs around its trunk. A candle carved with ancient Khmer letters was lit and wedged between two stones. "This is not exhumation," he said. "Not yet." Prosert stood by the boundary stone, holding a faded parasol to shield the offerings from the wind. His hands were trembling, but not from cold. "We will speak to her first. Ask for permission." He knelt, closed his eyes, then began to chant, slow, rhythmic, guttural. The words were old, older than the temple, older than Ayutthaya. As the chanting deepened, the wind stopped. Even the leaves froze in mid-rustle. The flame on the candle flickered once, then turned blue. Bunta's voice dropped into a rasp. "Spirits of the earth, daughter of pain, woman without name, we call you now." The ground pulsed, just once. Then from within the dirt, a soft cracking sound echoed, like bones shifting after centuries of silence. Prosert stepped back, eyes wide, and from the stillness came a sound no one expected. A cry, high, faint, like an infant's wail, buried, muffled, but real. It lasted only seconds. Then silence. Bunta opened his eyes. "She is here." That evening, the family prepared what was needed. Mejentana burned incense in front of Ratri's photo, but said no prayers. She simply stared. For the first time, her grief had hardened into something else, confusion and fear. Prosert laid out 2 sets of white clothing, one for Ratri, one for the bones they were about to disturb. Bunta wrapped a white thread soaked in holy water around the base of the tamarind tree. He placed 3 white flags around the grave and lit a string of oil lamps that traced the edge of the burial mound. At midnight, the ritual began. It took hours to dig. The earth beneath the tamarind was resistant, clay thick and stubborn. Every shovel of dirt felt heavier than the last. Then, the shovel struck something hollow. Wood, or what was left of it. A rotted coffin, unmarked, hand-built, barely large enough for an adult body. Bunta crouched beside it, whispered a final chant, then opened it. Inside, the bones were mostly intact. A woman's skeleton, limbs curled toward her chest, jaw agape, hands clutched around her swollen ribs. And between the pelvic bones, tiny fragments. A fetus, still curled, still clinging. Mejentana gasped. Prosert turned away. Bunta placed 2 lotus petals on the skull and bowed low. She never left, and no one ever came back for her. They removed the remains carefully, wrapping them in a ceremonial cloth. No one spoke. As they lifted the bones out, the air thickened. The oil lamps flickered wildly. The tree groaned, not from wind, but from within. A deep cracking, as though something old and bound was shifting for the first time in years. Then came the smell, not of rot, but of scorched silk, burning hair. Prosert dropped the parasol and looked up. Smoke was rising from the direction of their home. They ran, through the temple yard, past the pavilion, toward the house. The front door stood ajar. The smell of ash was everywhere. Megintana was the first to scream. Ratri's frontal photo, the one placed beside the altar, had turned black. Not burnt, but erased. Her face had faded, leaving only her outline behind. And on the wall above it, 4 blackened fingerprints, long, burned into the paint, pointing downward. Bunta stared at them, then turned sharply to Prosert. "We must finish this before they find each other." "Who?" the boy asked. "The mother and the stolen daughter." At dawn, they brought both bodies, Ratri's and the wrapped remains of the unnamed woman, to the cremation pavilion. Bunta knelt before the unlit pyre. His voice trembled for the first time. "This has only been done once in my lifetime, and it failed." "Why?" Megintana asked, her voice raw. "Because they waited too long." He looked up at the sky. "You must understand, this is not a funeral. It is a release and a confrontation." Prosert whispered, "What if it doesn't work?" Bunta's eyes narrowed. "Then you will not only lose your sister." He paused. "You will lose yourselves, piece by piece, shadow by shadow." That night, Ratri came to Prosert again. But this time, she did not whisper. She screamed. Screamed until his ears bled in the dream. Screamed until his bed caught fire. Screamed with a voice that was hers and not hers. Screamed from 2 mouths. When he woke, smoke filled his room, but nothing burned. Only ash on the floor, in the shape of 2 footprints, and between them, a small, charred lotus flower. By morning, the lotus flower had withered to dust. The ash footprints had faded, but not before Bunta carefully traced their outlines with white chalk and sealed them with a ring of salt. "They've touched," he murmured. Megintana didn't need to ask what he meant. Her hands were already trembling. She stared at her son's face, pale, eyes sunken, lips cracked from restless sleep. "You're seeing her, aren't you?" she whispered. Prosert nodded, slowly. "Not just her," he said. They gathered again in the cremation pavilion. Ratri's body lay on the left pyre, wrapped in fresh white silk. On the right, the bones of the unnamed woman, bound in crimson cloth. Between them stood a clay bowl filled with river water and ash, a vessel for the spirit that could not decide where to go. Bunta stood with a bundle of incense and 2 candles, one white, one black. "This spirit," he said softly, "has no name and no one to call her home." He turned to Prosert. "Spirits that die during childbirth and remain uncremated, they are lost between realms. They remember pain, not words. They remember death, not who they were." He held up the black candle. "But when they cling to the living, they begin to change." Prosert stepped forward, looking at the bundle of bones. "Why did she choose Ratri?" he asked. Bunta didn't answer at first, then said, "She didn't choose her. She reached out blindly, and your sister was kind enough to stop. He placed the white candle at Ratri's feet, the black candle beside the second pyre. This is why the fire would not take. This is why the body stays cold. The dead cannot burn when they are not complete. That night, the house fell into stillness. Too still. No wind, no crickets, no dogs barking in the distance. Even the river outside seemed to hold its breath. And in that silence, something walked again. Bare feet against old wood, but heavier now, slower, as if they had learned the weight of flesh again. Majentana turned toward the altar. The mirror Bunta had placed beneath Ratri's photo had cracked, not shattered, but split clean down the center. Her reflection stared back at her with someone else's smile. In his room, Prasert sat up suddenly. The air was thick. His lungs wouldn't expand. He reached for the window, but something was already there, standing just outside the glass, a figure, his sister, and yet not. Her face was pressed against the pane, expressionless, but the eyes, they were wrong. Too dark, too deep, eyes that didn't blink, eyes that didn't search, but remembering. He blinked. She was gone. But when he looked down at the floor, there was water, a thin trail, like something had stepped out of the river. And beneath his bed, the faintest whisper. Not her name, not her name. The next morning, Bunta called the elders of the village to the pavilion. He did not ask, he commanded. Something in his voice made even the oldest monk bow. "Who is buried beneath the tamarind tree?" he asked. No one answered. "Who died there alone, child in womb, nameless?" Still, silence, until Kunyai Prapa finally spoke. "She was a widow," she whispered, "from Ban Kai Noi, came to our village when she was pregnant. She begged the temple to help her when her time came, but the monks said she had no family, no record, no husband." Prapa's eyes filled with guilt. "She died under the tree, alone." "And the child?" Bunta asked. "Stillborn." "No rights?" Bunta pressed. "No name," she said. "No fire, only fear." Bunta nodded. "Then this is not only her grave, it is your shame." That evening, Majentana began to hum, softly. It was an old lullaby, one she had sung to Ratri as a child. Prasert recognized it from his dreams, but this time it was different, off-key, slowed, as if the voice was not singing to a child, but remembering being one. He followed the sound into the kitchen. His mother stood facing the wall. Her hands were wet, her eyes open wide, and behind her reflection in the dark window was another, a woman, pregnant, crying, smiling. Bunta burned herbs in every room that night, camphor, neem, ghost pepper. He traced protective circles with rice flour and black ash, but the walls still pulsed, the shadows still grew longer, and near midnight they heard the knock. 1, 2, 3, from inside the cremation pavilion. They rushed there. The wind had risen, strong and sudden, but the candles were still lit. Only one thing had changed. The black candle had melted completely, and the silk around the unnamed woman's bones was wet. "She's coming through," Bunta said. "The spirit has tasted warmth." In the final moments of the night, just before dawn, Ratri's body moved. One finger twitched, a hand curled, a toe lifted, then stilled. Magentana collapsed, but Bunta caught her. "She is not waking, she is being worn." He turned to Prasert. "If we do not reunite the souls, the unnamed one will take her place." And somewhere in the temple yard, beneath the tamarind tree, fresh footprints bloomed in the dirt, as if someone had just stood up. There are spirits that linger, spirits that whisper, and spirits that bind, not through touch or voice, but through shadow, a darkness that follows and never lets go. Mo Fi Bunta stood in the center of the cremation pavilion as dawn broke behind the trees. The sky glowed like fading embers, but the air remained cold, colder than any morning should be. Ratri's body had been rewrapped during the night. The white silk was replaced with cloth dipped in blessed oil. Her arms were crossed, fingers bound together by red thread soaked in salt water. And yet, her chest still rose, just barely, like something inside her was still breathing, or trying to remember how. "She's being worn," Bunta repeated. "Not possessed. That's too crude a word." He turned to Prasert. "Have you ever stepped into another person's shadow?" Prasert blinked. "I don't think so." "You have," Bunta said. "We all have, briefly, but most shadows push back." He placed a palm against the cold wooden railing. Ratri didn't. He began drawing symbols in chalk around the pavilion, loops, spirals, shapes that seemed to move even after they were finished. Some spirits don't want revenge, they want form, and the only way to return to this world is to find someone whose spirit is soft, open, kind. He paused. "Your sister saw her and did not turn away." Back at the house, Magentana had not slept. She sat by the altar, hands folded, whispering a name that didn't exist. Not Ratri, not the woman beneath the tree, just a soft, wordless lullaby, again and again. She had seen something behind her reflection, a pregnant woman with black eyes and a mouth that never closed. She remembered now, the night before Ratri died, her daughter had come home wet, clothes soaked to the hem, no rain, no river nearby. She had asked Ratri where she'd been. Her daughter had smiled gently and said, "I helped someone out of the dirt." Bunta listened to this carefully. She wasn't lying, he said, but she wasn't helping. She was trading. He explained the curse slowly. Shadow binding is one of the oldest forms of spiritual entrapment, not done through spells, but through desperation. When a spirit has been forgotten too long, buried too deep, denied its passage, it begins to reach out, through soil, through dream, through shadow. And if someone unknowingly steps over its resting place, the spirit binds, like roots around a foot, like fingers curling into another hand. It doesn't take the soul, Bunta said. It divides it. Ratri had unknowingly walked over the grave. The woman beneath had reached out, clung to her shadow, and when night fell, followed her home. But it's not just her now, Bunta added. This spirit has begun to forget she ever died. That evening, Prasert sat outside under the porch, eyes scanning the tree line. He heard chanting from the temple, monks offering prayers at sunset, but it sounded far away, thinner, like a signal fading in and out. And then he saw it, a silhouette in the banyan grove, not moving, just standing, facing the house. He rose, stepped down the stairs, and the figure stepped forward, one pace, then another, and the closer it came, the more it looked like Ratri, but her feet were on backwards. He ran inside, locked the door. The candles blew out. No wind, just cold. Inside the cremation pavilion, Ratri's hand twitched again. Her lips began to move. No sound, just the shape of words. Bunta leaned in, watched closely, and read her lips. One phrase, over and over. Where is the baby? He staggered back. No, she's becoming her. The transformation had begun. The spirit of the unnamed women, the Pi Tai Tong Klong, had taken root so deeply in Ratri's body that even the dead could not tell them apart. The two souls had started to bleed into each other, merging, confusing memory with flesh, grief with identity. There's no more time, Bunta said. If we don't burn both bodies soon, one soul will vanish. Which one? Prasert asked. Bunta didn't answer, but he lit the ritual fire that night, and the flames finally caught, not at the base, but in the middle, as if they had skipped the wood and gone straight to the soul. Inside Ratri's room, her photograph cracked down the center, not from heat, but from pressure, as though something inside the frame was trying to crawl out. And beneath the tamarind tree, the grave was empty. The grave was empty. Where there had once been bones wrapped in crimson cloth, now there was only disturbed earth, soft, cold, and freshly churned. Bunta stood motionless, staring at the hollow beneath the tamarind tree. The wind didn't move. Even the leaves above seemed to hold their breath. Prasert dropped to his knees beside him, heart pounding. She's gone! But Bunta shook his head. No, not gone. He reached down and touched the soil. Moved. Back at the pavilion, the flames from the ritual circle had already died. The fire that had briefly caught during the night now sat cold again, charred but unfinished. Ratri's body remained untouched by heat. Not a scorch, not a curl of silk. And yet, the silk around her legs was damp. With what? No one could say. They reconvened in the house just before dawn. Mejuntana wept softly into her shawl, her voice too hoarse for words. Bunta sat beside her, silent for a long time. He said, "She has made herself whole." he said finally. "How is that possible?" Bunta's voice dropped. "She took back what she lost." He turned toward Ratri's room. "She is no longer waiting for ritual. She is preparing for rebirth." Later that day, they followed a trail of black feathers scattered near the pavilion, leading toward the small shrine behind the temple. It was a place few visited anymore. Once used for forest spirits and local guardians, now overgrown, half collapsed, its wooden frame leaning like an exhausted man. At the base of the shrine, they found it, a burial cloth, the same crimson wrap that had held the bones, now covered with handprints, tiny, infant-sized, made of soot. And beside it, a single tooth, human, small, unformed. "She's feeding," Bunta whispered. Magentana looked at him, horrified. "On what?" "Memory, blood, grief. She wants to finish her death properly." "And if she does?" Bunta turned. "She will be born again in your daughter's body." That night, the walls of the house began to breathe. Not metaphorically, not imagined. They pulsed, wood flexed, nails creaked, as though the entire house were made of flesh, and something beneath the floorboards had begun to wake. Prasert couldn't sleep. The air was thick with heat and incense that no one had lit. He turned over in his bed and saw her. Ratri, sitting in the corner of the room, in her funeral dress, hair covering her face, hands resting gently on her lap. But her stomach was swollen, round, pregnant. He sat up, shaking. "Ratri?" She didn't respond. Her head tilted slightly. Then her hands moved, slow and careful, across the fabric of her dress, cradling the belly, smiling, not at him, but at something only she could see. Then she whispered, "I can feel her kicking." The next morning, Prasert told Bunta everything. The spirit doctor said nothing at first. Then he lit another set of charcoal bowls and poured chicken blood into a clay cup. He turned it upside down. The blood clung to the rim, refused to fall. "That's it. The spirit has fully entered. She is carrying the ghost child that was never born. It is not a possession anymore. It is a second life manifesting in a borrowed death, a corpse carrying a spirit, carrying another death inside it. It was a nesting of hauntings, a womb of suffering within a stolen body, and the fire would not burn until all three were laid to rest. Ratri, the nameless mother, and the child who never cried. The ritual had to change. The dual pyre would no longer be enough. They needed to create a third, one not for the body, but for the memory. The temple elders finally relented. They offered the cremation ground, under one condition. "No monks will attend," they said. "This is no longer a Buddhist death." They spent the day building the triple pyre, one platform for Ratri, one for the empty crimson cloth, the vessel of the unnamed mother, and one, the smallest, for the child who never lived. Bunta placed a broken mirror beneath the center pyre. He said, "Souls split by shadow cannot find each other unless they see their reflection. Then he poured river water around all three. The mother died thirsty. That night the rain returned for the first time in weeks. But it did not fall from the sky. It rose, mist and vapor curling from the soil, dampening the wood, soaking the prayer flags. And as the first candle was lit, the wind screamed, not howled, screamed like a mother searching for her child. Megentana wept in silence. Presert held the match, and Bunta stood before the three pyres, arms lifted. "This is your name," he whispered, "to the one who had none, to the child who was never blessed, to the girl who stepped into your shadow. Let this be the fire that unbinds." And as the flames took, the rain stopped, the trees stood still, and for the first time, Ratri's body began to burn. The flames did not crackle. They whispered, thin, pale tongues of fire licking the edges of silk and ash-drenched cloth. No smoke, no scent of burning, only heat that didn't warm, a fire that seemed to eat light rather than give it. 3 pyres, 3 forgotten souls, the girl, the mother, the child, and only one chance to free them all. Bunta stood closest to the fire. The hem of his robe fluttered, but his face was still, eyes closed, hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from reverence. "This is no ordinary cremation," he said. "This is a return." The first flame, the white, belonged to Ratri's body. It moved slowly, like a candle's breath, resisting, reluctant, like the flesh itself wasn't sure it was ready to let go. The second flame, the black, curled up from the crimson-wrapped bundle of bones, dancing faster, hungrier, as though that spirit had been waiting too long to burn. The third pyre, the smallest, did not catch at all. Bunta frowned. "The child is not ready." Megentana wept silently. Her daughter's body was now alight, but she couldn't look away. The way the flames swirled around her face, not consuming it, but circling, as if trying to decide who it belonged to. Then Ratri's lips parted. A whisper escaped the flame. "He was never named." Presert turned toward Bunta. "What does she mean?" Bunta's voice was grim. "The child," he said. "No name, no offering, not even grief." He stepped back from the flames and pulled a small clay bowl from his satchel. Inside, white rice, black sesame, and the soft remains of a broken bird's egg. He placed it gently at the foot of the third pyre and whispered, "You were wanted, even if the world didn't say it." The third flame caught, just a spark at first, then a slow flicker, then steady light. As the 3 fires burned together, the air shimmered, not from heat, but from presence. A sound rose between the pyres, not wind, not voice, but memory. Laughter, footsteps, a lullaby. And then, layered beneath them all, a scream. The scream of a woman giving birth and the child never breathing. The ground shook gently, just once, a pulse. And in that moment, Ratri's fire changed. It rose, not in height, but in color, from pale orange to violet, then gold, then white, pure white,
and in the center of the flame, for a breathless moment, she stood. Ratri, not as a corpse, not as a shadow, but whole. Her hair loose, her eyes clear, and in her arms, the ghost of a child. She looked at her mother, smiled softly, and whispered, "She's resting now." Then the wind took her. The flame lifted into the sky. The pyre collapsed gently in on itself. No ash, no bone, only silence. The other two fires burned slower. The crimson-wrapped bones turned black, then silver. The smallest pyre, where the unnamed child's spirit had curled, vanished without smoke. Only a faint scent of jasmine remained. Bunta collapsed to his knees. The ritual was over, but the ground still hummed beneath them, like something sealed had just clicked shut. Later that night, they scattered the ashes into the river. The moon reflected 3 times on the water, and for the first time since her death, Ratri did not return in dreams. No footsteps, no whispering, no shadow outside the window. Only peace. But peace does not come without cost. Mai Gintana never spoke of the child again. She kept a single baby sock, found beneath the pyre, in a silver locket she wore to the end of her life. Prosert left the village after the rains returned. Some say he became a teacher in Chiang Mai. Others say he joined the monkhood. But those who remember him say this: he always walks with his shadow carefully, never stepping over graves, never lighting incense carelessly, never turning his back to mirrors. And Mo Pi Bunta, he left a final inscription carved into the old tamarind tree. Some spirits are not evil, only forgotten. But in the years that followed, the tree never grew again. Its roots stayed twisted, its bark remained cold. And on some nights, in the space between moonrise and morning, villagers say they hear a lullaby beneath the soil, soft, cracked, and waiting.
It had been 3 days since the ritual. The fires were gone, the ashes scattered. The tamarind tree had not moved, not a leaf, not a sound. And yet, Prosert could not sleep. Not because of fear, but because of silence. The kind of silence that feels too complete, too perfect. As if the world was trying to convince him everything was fine. On the 4th night, he lit no incense. He whispered no prayers. He simply lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, watching the slow crawl of shadows as the moon shifted outside his window. His mother slept soundly in the next room, her breathing steady. The house, for once, was still. But his skin itched, his chest felt pulled, as if something beyond the walls had reached an invisible thread into his ribcage and was gently tugging it, again and again. At midnight, he rose. He didn't remember deciding to get up. His body moved on its own, slow, deliberate, feet bare, eyes unfocused. He walked out the door and into the open air. The moon hung low and heavy. The river whispered nearby. And somewhere far in the distance, a bell rang once. He walked past the pavilion, past the prayer flags that still fluttered like ghosts in the windless night, past the shrine where the crimson cloth had once been burned. He walked to the tamarind tree and stopped.
The tree looked different in the moonlight, not dead, but dreaming. Its branches no longer reached upward, but curled downward, like arms cradling something unseen. Beneath it, the earth pulsed softly, not with movement, but with memory. He stepped closer, and the soil sighed. He knelt, touched the ground with his fingertips. The dirt was warm, like skin. Then he heard her. Not behind him, not around him, inside him. Ratri, don't leave me here. He turned. No one. But the tree shifted, and a shape emerged from behind its thick roots. A woman, but not Ratri, and not the ghost, something between. She wore a white dress, stained with smoke and soil. Her eyes were Ratri's, but her hands were old, not in age, in grief. She reached toward him and said nothing. He wanted to move, to run, to scream, but he didn't, because in that moment he realized something. She wasn't trying to haunt him. She was trying to remember who she was. Then he saw the child, just behind her, not standing, not walking, floating, eyes closed, head resting against the air as if it were cradled by invisible arms. And then the woman turned, took the child, held it close, and began to hum. The lullaby, that same broken tune he'd heard from his mother's lips the night Ratri's photo cracked. Only now it was whole, beautiful, and unbearably sad. The earth beneath his knees warmed, and he felt something give way, as though a knot had loosened, not in the ground, but in the space between the living and the dead. The woman, this merging of Ratri and the nameless spirit, looked at him one last time. Her mouth opened, and her voice echoed in both tones. "Thank you for walking with me." Then she stepped backward into the roots of the tamarind tree and vanished. Presert woke in his bed the next morning, covered in ash. His feet were damp with river water, and beneath his pillow a single, perfect jasmine blossom, still fresh, still fragrant. Bunta returned later that day, called back by a dream of smoke and white flowers. He listened to Presert's story in silence, then nodded slowly. "She's made her choice." "What choice?" Presert asked. "To rest or to return?" Presert paused. "Which did she choose?" The spirit doctor smiled faintly. "If you have to ask, it means she didn't return." But that night, as the moon climbed high over the river and the cicadas hummed like memory in the trees, the old tamarind tree swayed once and dropped 3 leaves in the shape of a lotus, and on the wind, barely audible, a baby laughed. Only once. It was supposed to be over. The fires had burned, the ashes scattered, the spirits named, mourned, and laid to rest. But peace is not always permanent, and some flames do not die. They wait for wood, for breath, for memory. It began again on the 7th night after the final cremation. My Gintana woke to the smell of burning, but nothing was on fire. She checked the stove. Cold.
The windows, closed. Even the incense altar stood untouched. But still, the scent of scorched silk and bitter smoke clung to the air, thick, stifling, ancient. She turned toward the hallway and saw light. Flickering, orange and gold, pulsing like a heartbeat from beneath Prasert's door. She rushed forward, flung it open, but found him sleeping, untouched, peaceful. And still, the smell of fire filled the room. In the morning, Bunta arrived unannounced. He looked pale, weathered, eyes red from lack of sleep. "I had a dream," he said. My Gintana poured tea with trembling hands. Bunta didn't drink. He stared at the flickering shadows on the floor. She didn't leave. Prasert joined them, silent. He said nothing at first. Then quietly, "I feel her." "Ratri?" He shook his head. "No, the other one." Bunta closed his eyes, then whispered words too old to be translated. His fingers traced symbols on the tabletop, invisible to the eye, but heavy in intent. "She wasn't finished," he said. "Not just her grief, her ritual. She wanted justice." They returned to the pavilion that afternoon. The ash from the triple cremation had been long swept away. The wood was dry, the wind still. But the moment they stepped onto the stone platform, a gust rose, strong, sudden, hot. And with it came the sound, a gasp from beneath the pavilion floor, like something was exhaling, alive, and very, very tired. Bunta knelt, placed both palms on the scorched stone, then recoiled. "The fire remembers," he whispered. It was not satisfied. That night they prepared the second ritual. But this time, it would not be to release. It would be to contain. Because whatever had merged with Ratri had tasted warmth, and once a spirit feels flesh, it hungers for it again. 3 circles were drawn, one with salt, one with ash, one with bone powder ground from the temple's oldest cremation urns. Inside the final ring, they placed what remained of Ratri's belongings: her white dress, her broken phone, a dried lotus, and the cracked mirror from the hallway. Each item was touched by the spirit. Each one still hummed with memory. Each one a gate. Bunta lit the fire. It roared immediately. Too fast, too eager. The flames leapt up, high and wild, before he'd even finished the first chant. The salt hissed, the mirror shattered, and the lotus burst into flame, not crumbling, but screaming. From within the fire came a shape, not clear, not solid, but present. A figure curled in the flame like a fetus in a womb, and behind it, another, larger, twisted, watching, waiting. The fire began to rise higher. It licked the beams of the pavilion. It touched the eaves of the roof, and then it turned. Flames don't usually bend, but this fire did. It reached sideways, unnaturally, toward my Gintana. She screamed as her sleeves caught fire. Bunta rushed forward, doused her arm with river water,
But the flame didn't act like fire. It clung, it crawled, it wanted her. Prasert, shaking, stepped into the ring of ash. The fire surged again, then paused, just for a moment, just long enough for him to speak. "I see you." His voice cracked. "I see what you want." The flame shrank, trembled, lowered. He reached into the center of the fire, bare-handed, and pulled out the cracked mirror. It didn't burn him. He held it to the air, angled toward the flame, and in the reflection, he saw her. Not Ratri, the other woman, the mother, the one without a name. She was crying, not in rage, not in pain, but in sorrow. He whispered, "You weren't finished, were you?" The flames flickered, softened. He turned to Bunta. What did she want? Bunta looked into the fire and said the only word that mattered: recognition. The next day, a monk arrived with an old scroll. In it, records from over 70 years ago, burials without rites, unmarked graves, and one name scratched out at the bottom. A woman, unknown origin, pregnant, died at temple gates. Next to her entry, written in faint ink, "Fire refused." They wrote her name that evening. Not a legal name, not official, but a gift. A name spoken aloud, written in white chalk on the steps of the pavilion. Nontaya, one who awaits the light. They lit a final fire. No ritual, no chanting, just a single candle, and her name whispered into the smoke. The pavilion did not burn. The wind did not rise, but the stone floor grew warm, then still, then silent. And from that night onward, no one heard footsteps in the house. No dreams disturbed Prasert's sleep. No reflections moved on their own. Only the fire pit in the pavilion remained black, permanently stained. And in the morning dew, some say you can still read the name Nontaya.
The next morning, the village temple bells rang before dawn, a sound no one had heard in weeks, low, steady, measured, as if calling something or someone not to worship, but to witness. Prasert arrived with Bunta just after sunrise. The temple grounds were quiet. No crows, no dogs, no rustling leaves. The cremation pavilion stood still, as though the fire from the night before had burned time itself into silence. On the temple steps, 3 monks waited, 2 young, 1 old. The elder monk's name was Pra-Achandriti-Chai. He had lived at the temple for over 40 years, and yet he had never once come to a cremation, until now. "May I speak with you?" the monk said to Bunta, "alone." But Prasert followed anyway. He had earned that right. Too much had already been buried. They entered the vihar, the prayer hall lined with gold and shadows. Pra-Ritichai sat slowly before the main Buddha statue, then spoke, quietly. "There was another fire," he said, "long ago." He told them the truth. Decades before, during the rainy season of a forgotten year, a woman arrived at the gates of the temple. Pregnant, exhausted, bleeding. She begged for shelter. She begged for a monk to guide her soul if she died. She begged for someone to hold her hand.
But the abbot at the time refused. She had no husband, no ID, no guardian. She was unclean, the temple said. So they left her outside, and she died before morning. The villagers buried her quickly, not in a coffin, but in a sack of temple cloth and dirt. No chanting, no record, no name. Only one monk, a young novice at the time, snuck out that night and placed a jasmine flower over the soil. That monk was Ratri. "I was told never to speak of it," he said, voice brittle with age. The abbot feared she had cursed the grounds, and for years after, strange things happened. Fires that wouldn't catch, smoke that rose without source, voices in the rain. When Ratri died, quietly, mysteriously, Ratri knew. He knew the spirit had found another way in, but still, he said nothing. "I was afraid," he confessed. "I thought if I ignored her, she would go away." His hands shook now. But spirits are like children left alone too long. They stop crying. He looked up and started screaming. Bunta nodded slowly. "You knew where she was buried." Ratri said nothing. He didn't need to. Later that day, Prasert walked back to the cremation pavilion, alone. The air was cooler now. The tamarind tree no longer loomed. The river sang softly in the distance. He sat on the stone steps, where her name, Nantalya, was still faintly etched. He traced it with his finger, then lit a single stick of incense, not out of fear, not out of obligation, but because someone had once asked to be remembered, and no one had answered. From behind him, Ratri approached slowly. He placed a folded piece of paper beside the incense bowl. "This was the chant I should have said," he whispered. Prasert unfolded it. Old Pali, a death prayer for those without name. It had never been spoken aloud, until now. Together they recited it, slowly, solemnly. And when the last syllable fell into silence, a breeze passed through the pavilion, gentle, grateful, gone. That night, Mai Jintana dreamed of Ratri one final time. She was walking in the temple courtyard, barefoot. The air was filled with jasmine, and beside her, a woman with long black hair, cradling a baby wrapped in firelight. Ratri smiled and waved once, then turned away. Mai Jintana woke up crying, but this time the tears were not from grief, they were from peace. In the weeks that followed, the pavilion was cleaned. The tamarind tree bloomed again, small white flowers along its lowest branches, and the temple finally held a ceremony, not a cremation, but a naming. They carved a plaque, Nantaya, daughter of no one, mother of memory. May no woman ever die alone again. And at the base of the tree, a small shrine was built, for the unborn, for the unnamed, for the unfinished. People left flowers, toys, ribbons, and each morning 3 candles were lit. One for the mother, one for the child, one for the one who came too close and made things right. Night returned with gentler breath. The river ran calmly again. The wind no longer screamed through the trees, but still something lingered, a quiet weight
in the air. Not threat, not malice, but unresolved longing. For the villagers, the haunting was over, but for Mo Fi Bunta, it wasn't finished. He knew the signs: ash that clung to walls days after burning, dreams that carried the scent of smoke, mirrors that refused to hold reflections after dusk. The curse had been quieted, but not broken. A spirit like Nantayaz did not disappear, not after so many years buried beneath silence. She is not violent now, Bunta said, but she is not free. They gathered once more at the base of the tamarind tree, this time not to dig, not to burn, but to speak, to offer. The shrine was ready, small but lovingly built, carved from temple wood and painted with gold leaf. Inside, a figurine of a mother holding a child, both without faces, symbolic, intentional, so that Nantaya could see herself in it. Bunta lit incense, 3 sticks, then placed a small offering before the shrine, a clay bowl of rice, a wooden rattle, and a folded slip of paper. On it, a bargain, a written vow. Prasert read it aloud. To the one who was forgotten, we offer you remembrance, a name, a shrine, a voice that speaks you back into the world. But we ask you now, do not return through fire. Do not walk the dreams of children. Do not cling to wombs not meant for rebirth. Take this place as yours, and let the living walk in peace. The incense smoke swirled, then bent toward the shrine, not with wind, but with will. A soft wind rose from the earth. Leaves fluttered around them in a spiral, not wild, but rhythmic, like the breath of something exhaling for the first time in centuries. Then a sound, a chime, not from any bell, but from the inside of the shrine. Bunta closed his eyes. She accepts. But nothing is accepted without something in return. That night, Bunta dreamed of the river. He stood in the water, up to his knees, surrounded by white lotuses drifting silently across the surface. And there, at the river's bend, stood Nantaya, wearing a red shawl, holding the child. She looked at him with calm eyes, then lifted a finger and pointed. Behind him, he turned and saw the future. A girl, not yet born, walking barefoot through the temple grounds, stopping at the shrine beneath the tree. She placed flowers there, whispered a name, and then laughed, alive, unafraid, and unhaunted. He awoke with tears in his eyes, for the first time in years. The next morning, Bunta took the folded paper, the vow, and burned it at the foot of the shrine. It vanished instantly. No smoke, no ember, just gone. Accepted. The wind shifted, the earth stilled, and beneath the shrine the roots of the tamarind curled inward, as though holding something close, something precious, something kept. Prasert stopped dreaming of Ratri that after, and he never again saw the woman in the smoke. But he often heard a faint lullaby on windless nights, coming from nowhere, familiar, comforting, not haunting. Mage Intana still set a bowl of sweet rice outside the shrine every 7th night. She never expected it to be touched. But sometimes, just sometimes, the rice would be gone by morning, and in its place
a single white feather. Bunta left the village not long after, not because he was afraid, but because he wasn't needed anymore. He walked barefoot to the river one morning, placed a coin on his tongue, and stepped into the water. He wasn't seen again. Some say he went to join the mountain monks. Others say he became part of the river itself, a spirit among spirits, a watcher who no longer needed to speak. But long after he was gone, the shrine remained, never overgrown, never forgotten. And when the new temple abbot asked who it honored, the villagers simply said, "The woman who was lost, and the girl who brought her home."
It began with a whisper, a passing idea, a quiet voice in a meeting of elders. Perhaps there should be a funeral, not for Ratri, not for the child, but for her, the one who had waited in silence beneath the tree for far too long. A funeral not born of fear, but of respect. Word spread quickly, and something unexpected happened. People came, not just from the village, but from nearby towns, curious, reverent, unsure. They had all heard pieces of the story: the fire that wouldn't burn, the spirit that split, the girl who died and died again, the grave that breathed. But this time, there was no fear in their steps, only flowers in their hands. The villagers prepared the cremation pavilion one final time, but not to burn a body. There was no body left, only memory. And so they built a symbolic coffin, carved from tamarind wood, the same tree that once held her sorrow. Inside it, they placed the remnants of her story: a length of crimson cloth, a pair of handmade baby shoes, a lotus folded by Mage Intana, a cracked mirror Ratri once whispered through, and a scroll bearing her name, Nanthaya, she who waited. There were no monks, no chants, no golden robes, only villagers, old and young, standing in silence as the sun began to set. Candles flickered in shallow bowls along the edge of the pavilion, and from a distance the river sang softly. Presert stepped forward first. He wore simple white. In his hands he carried a bowl of river water. He poured it slowly over the symbolic coffin, whispering the same words Buntha had once used. Let the forgotten be remembered. Let the silence be lifted. Let the path be cleared. Mage Intana followed. She did not cry. She had no more tears left, only peace. She knelt before the coffin and placed her hand on the wood. I see you now, she whispered. I should have seen you then. She laid the baby shoes gently inside. One by one, others came. They brought small offerings, not of gold or incense, but of regret. Stories of women lost in childbirth, grandmothers never named, sisters who died too young with no funeral of their own. The funeral became more than hers. It became theirs. When the sun fell low, they lit the fire. It caught gently, not like before. There was no hunger in this flame, only grace. The smoke rose in slow spirals, curling upward into the dusk, as though carrying stories too long buried. There were no screams, no signs, no twisted shadows, only warmth. As the ashes cooled, the elders collected them in a clay urn. No one argued where it should go. They placed it beneath the shrine under the tamarind tree, where the ground was now soft, welcoming, alive. A stone marker was added beside it, simple, unadorned. It read, "For the woman we left behind, and the child who waited with her, forgive us. We remember now." The air changed after that. Not dramatically, but gently. The village seemed lighter, the river less restless, the wind kinder. As if something ancient had been lifted, not removed, but released. And in the nights that followed, those who passed by the pavilion swore they could hear a sound, not footsteps, not crying, but humming, a lullaby carried on wind that no longer moaned, but rocked, as though someone, somewhere, was singing a child to sleep. And this time, the child stayed asleep.
The rains returned, not with thunder, not with fury, but with grace. Soft drizzles in the early morning, warm showers that kissed the temple rooftops. The earth drank slowly, as though savoring every drop. The river rose, not in warning, in welcome. It curled gently along the edges of the village, whispering against stones, slipping through reeds like fingers through silk. And with it came remembrance. Ratri's photograph now sat in the family altar, surrounded by lotus petals and a single candle that never failed to stay lit. Not because it was protected, but because she was at peace. Her name no longer invoked tears. It brought smiles, soft ones, the kind that sting a little, but heal more than they hurt. Majantana tended the shrine beneath the tamarind every 7th day. She wore white now, not mourning robes, but renewal. She spoke to Nanthaya softly, like an old friend, no longer begging for forgiveness, just keeping her company. And every now and then, she swore the tree answered, not in words, but in blossoms. 3 white flowers fell each time she visited, one onto her lap, one onto the stone, one into the breeze. Persert no longer dreamed of fire. He dreamed of water, of Ratri laughing at the river's edge, ankles deep, skipping stones that never sank, of a baby resting against her chest, asleep, of Nanthaya sitting nearby, not as a ghost, not as a shadow, but as a woman, whole, human, home. He left the village years later, but he returned often, always quietly. Sometimes he brought books to the shrine, stories he thought the child might have liked. Sometimes he brought jasmine tea for his mother, and sometimes he brought nothing at all, just himself, just silence, and the river. By then, the villagers had changed. The story was still told, but softer now, no longer as a warning, but as a prayer, a lesson passed from lips to hearts. Bury no one without name,
Listen to the wind. Never ignore a fire that won't burn. And most of all, some spirits don't want to haunt you. They just want to be seen. The cremation pavilion was rebuilt with stone and gold. Tourists came. They asked questions. The guides always told part of the truth, but not all. Some stories are not meant to be explained, only felt. Under the pavilion, the fire pit remained blackened, no matter how many times it was scrubbed. Children whispered about it after school. Some dared each other to step into the circle. Most never did. But those who did felt warm, as though someone had placed a gentle hand on their shoulder and said, "I see you. I remember you. You may go now." And far from the pavilion, near the river's edge, a second shrine appeared one summer. No one claimed to build it. It was simple, unmarked, just a stone basin with water and a mirror placed inside. But the locals left coins in it, and flowers, and once a letter sealed in red wax with 7 words: "To the one who shared her shadow." The letter was never opened. It didn't need to be, because some things, like grief, like healing, like love between the living and the dead, do not live in words. They live in water, in fire, in soil, in shadow. And if you go to that village today, if you walk to the river before dawn, you may see a woman there, dressed in white, hair tied back. Not a ghost, just a memory, standing at the water's edge, humming a lullaby to a child no one can see. And if she turns to you and smiles, smile back. Then keep walking. She doesn't want anything from you, only for you to remember. Because the fire has long gone cold, but the river always remembers.